All right, that was an awesome episode. I just had the pleasure of talking to Charlie Specht, investigative journalist. You probably know him. He's broken some massive stories here in Buffalo. He's worked in every major newsroom, and now he's gone out on his own because of the integrity he has and the stories he wants to tell. He's got a Substack now where you should follow him, but you should really listen to this episode and hear about why he does what he does, some of the biggest stories he's broken, how he gets his tips, his process of investigating cases. I mean, I know probably like you, just like me, I mean, I love documentaries on investigative journalism. So if you're into that type of stuff, you're going to want to listen to this episode. We talked for a while. I hope you enjoyed. Check it out. As always, it's brought to you by my law firm, Richmond Vona Personal Injury Attorneys. Hope you never need us, but if you do, we got your back. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Looking forward to talking to you. I'm not just saying this. I said to Brad, I was like, look, I want to get on an investigative reporter because when I'm asked, sometimes people ask me, if you weren't a lawyer, what would you want to do? I'm like, honestly, investigative journalism,
really?
Documentary filmmaking.
Oh, yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. Because I think it's super interesting what you do. A lot of respect for what you do. There are a lot of parallels to what we do as trial lawyers, especially in some of the bigger cases where there's deep investigations, or my background in asbestos litigation where there's mass industry cover-ups and everything. So yeah, I appreciate you being here, man. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Yeah. No, and it's funny you say that because I've had people say to me, you should become a prosecutor. You should become a lawyer or something. So
I think you made a good decision.
There are a lot of parallels. So you're right. As far as, investigative reporting is I would say is similar to that because you're sort of, you're being a little more of an advocate than a regular news reporter would be, and you're building a case kind of. Yeah. Like a lawyer builds a case.
Yeah. And with lawyers, right? We obviously, we advertise or through friends or family, people call us and say, hey, I know you guys, so for us, I know you guys do car accidents and I got in this car accident. And that's how we are usually introduced to the person. I'm curious, I'm sure there's different ways, but how do you find out about something or how do you get a tip and you're like, oh man, okay, this is something I want to look into?
Yeah, it's a mix of different ways. I've worked at places that had a tip line, a literal number you put on TV that people would call, and people will call that. A lot of tips I've gotten through, Facebook, social media, people just DMing me with, and it's usually a tip that, okay, maybe it's 2 sentences. I heard something about this, where it's okay, I need more than that to go on. So then, have people email me. And then a lot of my best tips are just things that people I trust in the community, whatever their profession is. I know they're good people, they're ethical, moral people, and, whether they're involved in politics or, they're lawyers, whatever, they'll call and say, hey, I heard this. I just wanted you to know about it. Maybe you could track it down. And the original tipster may have nothing to do with the actual story. Some things I just take and I know how to verify things. I know what documents are out there. But there's a lot of vetting, just we don't just, and people think, and we make it look in some ways oh, I just dug into this yesterday and put it on TV. It's no, this takes many months for a lot of investigations. When we broke story, big police corruption, Granville story this year, we reported that out for probably a month straight where I was not on TV. It was just every day pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, doing FOIL requests. And, I was thankful that I had the time to do that. And that's really that's what you don't have when you see a lot of the decline of journalism. They won't pay someone to take a month and dig into something like that.
Why do you think that is? Is it they feel like they can't because of the business model or they just don't want to?
Yeah, business model, I think in journalism, really ever since, so I've been in the field 15 years now. Yeah. I graduated 2010 from St. Bonaventure, and business model has always kind of been crashing. I remember I was hired at the Buffalo News because a whole bunch of people before me had taken buyouts. Yeah. So it's always kind of, in some ways, younger people, I say younger, I'm 38, and us coming into positions of leadership in media, it's a little different in the sense that we weren't around for like the glory days per se of newspapers and TV. And so, I think a lot of the big media companies have been brought to their knees in a lot of ways. And, you used to see so many more reporters at all of the newspapers. Buffalo is lucky in some ways that the Buffalo News still is able to cover what it does, because in a lot of cities, in Pittsburgh, they just lost their main newspaper, just shut it down.
Yeah.
So it's hard to do that. And then, at the national level especially, you're seeing people with political agendas buying up.
You don't say.
Right?
It's crazy.
Let's just buy the media company. That's a very effective way to silence, oppositional voices. And, the other thing, being an investigative reporter, you really do have to be independent, and make your mind, you really have to train yourself to keep an open mind, because it's easy to, have an idea that you think is correct, but you have to, in a lot of ways, test your own ideas and report against your own biases, because, it's not about what you think, it's about what you can prove. And what you really know, and how do you know it? All my stories were always, at least the big stories, they were always vetted by our, legal team of whatever newspaper or TV station I worked for. And, they would sometimes push back and say, well, how can you say this? How do you know this? And then you say, okay, here's a document that proves it. This is how, and it's a back and forth. They would sometimes change things, but thankfully, at the local level, I've never had any sort of censorship or anything. I've never worked in a place where they would make an ideological decision. Oh, this person is above scrutiny. No, that's never happened. And I wouldn't. I wouldn't make those kind of compromises. I think that there's a way to, you can be tough, but you also need to be fair. And a lot of times now I don't know if it's because there's more PR people out there, but a lot of times people in positions of power now just don't comment at all. They say no comment. And I think that sometimes that makes sense, but in a lot of times it doesn't help the person's image, because then it looks like you're sort of hiding something, right? Whereas I think if you come at issues head on, and sit down and do the interview, I think you end up probably looking better.
I think especially, I could see, if they're being asked questions by somebody who truly is a fact finder and is like, hey, I'm not trying to take this one way or another. I want to find out from you what happened in this situation, and they can be accountable and have that open and honest communication. You would hope that more people would do that, because I agree with you. Hitting things head on is the way to play it. Because if you're just running from it or saying no comment, it does look like what is going on. Something happened here, or the smoke, there's fire, right?
Right. Or, now it's very fashionable for people in politics to we'll just attack the messenger. We'll just blame the media. We'll call it fake news. We'll do, and that's a challenge for me. But the stuff that I'm reporting on, I typically have a lot of evidence to begin with. It's not just he said something and then I'm going to get a comment. It's not gotcha kind of stuff. I could do that. I could show up with a microphone every single day to City Hall and just get in everybody's face, and I'm sure it would be I'd get a lot of clicks and views on that, but that's not really the kind of journalism I want to do. I want to do stuff that's a little more in depth and a little more substantive, because every organization there's usually it's a mix. There's good people in the organization. There's people that are sort of leaders. Then there's always a middle ground where they'll sort of go whatever way the wind's blowing, right? So it's about creating a culture, and you have different loyalties and stuff. And part of what I do is, if we have let's say we have a whistleblower and an organization wants to come forward, some people want to come forward and give you information, but they don't want their name anywhere near it,
right?
Which I get, right? They could face blowback. So there's things that I can do to kind of protect them. I can't like promise them. I've had people ask me, legally, can you? And it's like, no, you're making a decision here. You could technically, Diocese of Buffalo was a perfect example. When we were doing our stories on that, what our main source was ended up being the bishop's administrative assistant, and she did say at one point to me, well, am I going to get sued? Am I going to get, put in jail if I do this? What, and I said, well, okay, let's talk it through. Like, you can't be put in jail because these are not classified documents by the U.S. government. That's the only way possessing classified materials can get you in jail. These are just things from a private organization. Now, that organization could sue you. And later I found out that they had considered it. But I mean, think about how bad that would look. Yeah. We're going to sue you because you were exposing the child abuse that we were covering up. I mean, it's like, it's a terrible.
You don't want to do that.
It would be terrible look. But you have to be honest with people. And sometimes people will come and they'll tell me something or they'll want it. And I almost have to, for their protection, say, you need to be aware that if you do come forward and we do this, there's a good chance, there's going to be some pressure put on you or something. Because I've had a lot of times, and this is actually pretty common, where people talk with a whistleblower. They go home, they talk to their spouse or whatever, and they, I talk to this guy and they think, oh my God, what have I done? I want to take it all back, kind of thing. And I always tell people, look, I'm not trying to make you do something that you don't want to do. I want to tell you these are all your options, but usually make a case to people and usually if they're coming forward with something, they're a person with a conscience anyway, where they see, maybe it's not that they, hate their organization. They probably went in there with a good, trying to do good things.
Right.
And maybe it's management or culture or something, and there's a divide and they just feel like, okay, this isn't right. Someone is being, someone is being victimized in some way, or, you're not serving your customers, whatever. And the mission has been, kind of compromised. That's usually what drives people morally to come forward.
If someone, there's an incredible amount of trust that somebody places in you when they come forward with a tip, right? Whether it's a whistleblower or somebody telling you about something they know that's going on in the community. And I'm sure, again, most of the time they don't want anyone knowing who they are. Like, you're not out there giving up, like, here's the person who DM'd me or here's the person who emailed me.
No.
I got to imagine that's, like, obviously a principle of journalism, right? It's just like an unspoken thing that you just don't do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I went to St. Bonaventure, and they have a great journalism program, and I was taught by all of these legends of Buffalo reporting. Lee Coppola was the dean of our journalism school. He was a big reporter here in newspapers and TV. And then John Hanchett, he was a professor, won a Pulitzer Prize. Denny Wilkins. We had this great, Paul Whelan, we had this great, staff of professors, and they put us through these, real tests usually about things that happened in their careers, that they would say, what would you do in this situation? But you never give up a source. Source reporter confidentiality is basically the most important thing. Like, we were always taught, you should go to jail before you give up a source as a reporter. And if you can't do that, then you're not really a reporter.
Yeah.
Now, I don't cover national security, so no one's ever put me in that position, right? But when they mean, like, the government coming and trying to find out who your source is, you're never to give that up. Anytime a reporter is, it's rare that we would be subpoenaed and asked to testify, but does happen. And lawyers always, your company's lawyer would always fight that tooth and nail to prevent that. So that is, and to me, if you don't have your honor as in, what I do, then in your reputation, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
Everything's built on that.
Yeah, I got to imagine like if a reporter if it's known that they are revealing sources, they're probably like shunned from the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And, word gets around. I mean, it's like any profession.
Yeah.
Word gets around about this person's a bad actor.
Yeah.
They make the rest of us look bad, that kind of thing. There's always, rogue kind of people out there that are cutting corners and doing that sort of thing. I mean, it also is kind of humbling too. You got to realize as a reporter, you're dealing with like people's lives here, so even people that that are sort of the person I'm doing maybe a story about that looks really bad. We've uncovered something that they've done, a violation of the public trust. I do, especially as I get older in the industry, I do try to always think about like they're a person too, and don't make it personal. Like it's never my goal to make it personal.
Yeah.
I look at it like I'm just doing my job, and hey, if you did something and you are in a position of public trust where you're getting funded by taxpayers, your salary or the equipment or whatever, and that, is misused, then like, yeah, on behalf of taxpayers, we have every right to look at that. I hear a lot of gossip and a lot of like stuff about people's private lives that I'm like, okay, that's not necessarily like public business, you know? I'm not the National Enquirer, I'm not interested in, that kind of stuff. So I try to look at it as I'm doing my job and providing a public service, but remember that they're a person too. I find that usually if people kind of are upfront with you, like I said, you look better. But I have had people, this guy who used to run the water department here, we did stories on excessive travel expenses. The guy was traveling all over the United States and Europe on these water conferences, and they
gotta go to the water conferences.
I never knew there were so many water. Yeah, you went to one in Germany. I was like, somebody told me we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to send this guy to these conferences, and then meanwhile they forgot the most basic thing. They weren't putting fluoride in the water. In Buffalo's water. So I was like, what? So
I didn't learn it at the Berlin conference in 09.
Yeah. But he didn't take it well. He kind of dug in and then like tried to like push back, and it was like, it just was bad, it's all in, I think, how you handle it too.
Yeah, for sure. I got to imagine you have your process down in terms of like, okay, you get a tip, you go through your vetting process, you say, this is something that like meets my criteria, something that I'm interested in. Like I want to devote the time to look into this because I think it's worthwhile and it's, for whatever other reason. Do you have like an actual like process, or is it like instinctual now? Like, hey, I'm just going to like, okay, well, there's this person to talk to, so I'm going to them and now they gave me this thing and now I'm going to look at this and I'm going to pull names from this and go talk to these people. Like, or is there like a structure you follow or?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny because like I'm starting actually this year teaching journalism at St. Bonaventure.
Oh, sweet.
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm teaching a 202 class down there, and when you start teaching, you're thinking of why you do things. Whereas I'm sure as professional, when you get good at your job, you just know how to do things kind of like that.
Yeah,
you don't think of it, but. So having to take that, and yeah, I think that the first thing is like journalism is a profession of like verification. So it's like, how can I take this tip and how can I verify it? So maybe I'll call, like, maybe it's a tip in politics, and I'll call 5 other people in the political world who I'm just friends with or I know, and say, have you heard anything about this? And like maybe they'll have a little part of it, but they haven't heard the whole thing, and maybe they'll mention, well, yeah, so and so gave money, and I can verify that because I can look at the campaign database. And then as many parts of this that are verifiable, then it's like, okay, you're getting a little closer to, yes, this could we could do this story.
Yeah.
We will be able to prove one way or the other if it's true or not true. I do believe, like, in, coming to people, you want, like, let's say you're compiling information, you want to go to the person to get a response and give them enough time, not try to, like, ambush them, but also you don't want to give too much time, because then they can try to, like, manipulate that. They could say, oh, we're going to go to this other station that's more friendly to us.
Yeah.
And, my friend works there and I'm going to do and it'll be easy. It'll be softball and we'll get ahead of it. And you don't want that to happen either. But I do believe that, like anything, you have to vet these things. And you have to almost try to disprove, like, your theory. Or you get into a story and you think, well, this is what source number one told me. The actual truth is something different. It's in the same ballpark, but it's totally different. And you have to be open enough intellectually to like let the facts tell you where to go, not just. And if you're doing this job well, you should also be reporting, like, trying to disprove your theory as well, right?
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you get a tip and you spend a lot of time going through your process, and you're going through it and it's verified and further verified, and you're like, okay, yep, I'm on the right track, and you spend a lot of time, energy, money chasing something. And I don't know if it works like this when you were working at, like, bigger media companies where, like, there's a deadline or whatever, and then you get close and you realize, oh no, now at the last minute I found something. I was just about to go public with whatever this is, and I just found out might not be what I thought it was. Have you had that happen, or do you have, like, guardrails in place to protect that? And I say that because I'm not speaking about anything in particular, but there's a lot of stories about, say, with, like, wrongful convictions, where the thought process anyways is that there's a lot of pressure on the police department, on the prosecutors, and wherever it is in the country. They go down this hole. The media pressure is like, find the person. They just grab some guy who they can kind of stick it to.
Right.
Wrongful conviction. 6 years later, the person's released, huge lawsuit. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how you deal with that, or if that's ever kind of happened to you where, like, you figured out kind of at the end.
So I haven't had a situation where it was the complete opposite was true or something, because then, yes, you would want to put everything on hold. I've had things where, like, you get, maybe you have to, like, not do, like, if you thought the story was going to be 2 parts, but you're not sure about some detail in part 2 that isn't a main thing, maybe you would just not do that, sort of hold it and finish that and put the first one on. I think fundamentally, if you have any idea that like, this is maybe not true, you shouldn't be putting it out there, sure. Or, like, but I think there's a lack of trust in media, the general public, and sometimes for good reason. I think that cable news, Fox News, MSNBC, all of that, the political news on cable has just totally, it's been a corrosive thing on democracy. It's not really journalism. It's what they used to call infotainment.
Yeah.
That's what our professors used to call it. It's outrage kind of news, and that's very different from, like, actual journalism. I'm not talking about opinions and stuff like that. Doing journalism in the public interest. Yeah, if you have any thought that something might not be true, thankfully I've always had bosses who are, like, very ethical people with great integrity. Oftentimes what happens is, like, what I've heard from, people I know in the industry, just, you don't have the time to do all of the digging. You have to have a story on, by the end of the week. And so you just end up not going after the kind of stories and those are the stories that just kind of don't get told. Yeah. And that's why I'm kind of trying to that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now and trying to go on my own, because I feel like I know how to do these stories. I know how to do them well. And a big part of what I want to do is, with my Substack, is let people in on the process. And because, we live in a different world now where the trust is lower. And I think if you show people, hey, this is what I'm starting with, and this is how I did this. I called this person, I looked up this document, I did this, and you show people the process, I think that can kind of restore some of the trust.
Yeah.
And then because people, I think there's a real, like being on TV, for instance, it's almost like playing more of a character in a way. You're just in this role, and it's a very kind of formulaic way of like presenting the news, and it's almost overly formal. And I think like that was fine for a time when people were like, okay, this is what the news said, so it must be true. We trust it. We don't live in, the 1970s anymore. We live in a time when people are very skeptical. They're much more media savvy. And I think, people can sense when you're not like authentic, or when you're,
for sure.
Right. Or when you're coming at something from like a bad faith kind of perspective. Right.
You got me thinking now. So first off, it's a great segue because I want to talk about like your movement into, being out on your own now and starting your Substack, which I think is awesome. But now you have me thinking like, so I love the idea of being transparent. It's funny, like with our firm too, that's something we take a lot of pride in, where, it goes back to what you're saying, like when we're kids, right? And you take a math test, you can't just write the answer. You have to show your work. You have to show that that you can show the teacher, this is how I got there. And that's what you're talking about. That's what we do. Or like we show our clients, like this is what's happening along the way. It's not like, hey, you hire us, you can't get us on the phone. We'll just tell you when we got some good news in 9 months or whatever, a year, like that. People aren't about that anymore. Like they want to know what's going on. They want the transparency. They want the authenticity. I probably shouldn't even say this on here because this doesn't exist. You and I got to talk. Is there, do you guys have like, because you're talking about showing people, do you work off of like a project management tool or some sort of technology that kind of keeps you going where you can keep everything?
I work just pretty much in Google Docs.
Yeah, we got to talk about this afterwards. I got some ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
I've had, friends in the industry that have like more of a checklist. They've taken a Google Docs and made it into, a thing. But also I get in the habit of like legally too, as a reporter, you want to be keeping some record and saying, I called this person at this time, just in case someone ever calls you on you didn't give me a chance to respond. You can say, oh, I have it right here, or I have the call recorded, or whatever, just protect yourself kind of thing. But yeah, that's, that is something. And I'm still kind of figuring out what I want the Substack to be. They're really pushing video right now and wanting to do Substack lives, which I can do, but I'm trying to really just every day figure out what kind of info do people want, what kind of stuff do you want me, maybe I'll spend more time at City Hall if people want me to, be covering that, or be covering more stuff with the diocese, or kind of whatever. I've even thought about, the legal community. I spent a lot of my time I notice with Substack that a lot of my early subscribers are lawyers, and I know a lot of lawyers from doing stories and stuff. And every day we started doing this when the Child Victims Act was passed, because of the state court website. The website is it's terrible. It's and you can't search things. You can only search civil suits on a daily basis. You can't search them by category or anything else. At least I can't, because I don't have a lawyer login.
No, you can't. It's terrible. I can confirm that. Yeah.
And so we would spend every day. So every new day there could be Child Victims Act lawsuits. So we would spend every day, just as a habit. First thing I do when I get in, I go on Supreme Court for Erie, then Niagara, and I go through and I look and I see what lawsuits are filed. Mm-hmm. And man, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the courts that people don't, really have any idea. Yeah. So I started I said, this is an idea. This is something I'm considering doing for this past month is saying, these are the 10, 15 most interesting lawsuits that were filed in Erie County in the last, because I think, courts and stuff used to be covered a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
The Buffalo News used to have a county court reporter and, a state reporter and a federal court reporter and, whatever, DA's office. And so now it's like they might have one reporter who's working really hard and doing as much as they can, but they can't cover every case, right?
Yep.
I remember growing up and watching and reading every single day about big trials that went on, in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily see that unless it's a really big federal trial or something. So, it can be things like that, just, providing a service to kind of different parts of the community.
I think, don't be afraid to ask the community, right? Because I think you'll have a lot of people volunteer and just tell you what they want to see. I think that's great that you're doing that. I have some ideas I got to talk to you about off camera. I can't put it all on here. Seriously, you have my brain going now. So not to go really too far back, but just, again, you pretty recently took the leap, right? You've worked in all these, big newsrooms around town. What was it? Like, what ultimately led you to make the decision? And how is it now being out on your own, so to speak?
So it's been really great. I have loved it so far. I'm still, like I said, I'm trying to build this Substack. I'm also writing a book right now.
Oh, sweet.
I'm in this book writing class, actually. I'm taking at Columbia Journalism School in New York. And the book is about, it's essentially, we did all these stories and broke this big sexual abuse scandal in Buffalo. And at the time, at least the way I do my job, you have to leave your personal stuff at the door and just objectively look at things. At the time I started reporting on it, I was raised very Catholic. I was an altar boy. At one point, I thought about maybe becoming a priest. My brother, Mike, who's 7 years younger than me, actually, the day that my first story broke about Bishop Malone was the same day that he joined the Franciscans.
Wow.
And to become a priest. He ended up not being a priest, right? I mean, he ended up not doing it. Years later, decided just it's not for me, but he's still very religious now, and it caused a lot of inner turmoil.
I can imagine.
And just our family, and we both have always supported each other, but that doesn't mean it's always been easy. And just my brother aside, just me, going through being someone who was kind of a true believer. I had my kids in Catholic school, and now I would say that I'm not really even Catholic.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, that I discovered there was, sex abuse going on. Everyone, I think kind of knew that, but it was just a process of it's really hard to sometimes look kind of under your own hood in some ways.
Yeah.
And, we had this guy that was going on. That's part of the book. Then it got really crazy. And we got my wife and I and our kids there was a stalker that came after us. And it got to be, the guy ended up going to federal prison, and it was a crazy time in my life. And we were living in these hotels, under fake names with the FBI was involved. It was nuts. It was crazy. And I was just man, my life is kind of spun out of control here. So there's a lot of that I didn't put that on TV, obviously. So I'm writing it up and then trying to develop into this narrative, kind of the personal side. So I'm taking time to do that right now. But what I would like to do is probably do some combination of teaching and working. I'll probably want to be working in some part-time or part-time or full-time capacity, doing some journalism, in addition to the Substack, but I see it as this is just the way kind of things are going. That's why I made the leap. I think that, I started at Buffalo News. I've worked at Channel 7. I went back to the news, worked at Channel 2. And you know what? All of these places, I learned something at all of those places that benefited me and my career, and worked around a ton of great people, worked for really good managers. Unfortunately, like, you work for enough companies and you're like, okay, the corporate part of this is just like something that I don't need to deal with anymore.
Yeah.
I have, in a lot of these cases, unfortunately, in the media, just in general right now, decisions aren't even being made at the local level. They're being made by some corporation in a different state. And, and a lot of it is just based on, when you work for a publicly traded company, it's just, shareholders. They're making decisions based on, finances and shareholders, and
you got advertisers in there.
And that's something that the journalism business, people want journalism, and there's more information out there than ever. But it's like is it reliable?
Right. That's the problem.
There's so much junk on the internet, and I think it's the business model that has really kind of turned out to be the problem. So this Substack, it's essentially like, you can subscribe directly to me. So someone can pay $8 a month and get all of my updates, or they can pay, on a yearly basis, but they kind of cut out the middleman. So say you give $10, I think Substack takes out like $1.30 out of that, and then the writer gets the rest. So I think it's platforms, and who knows, that may be the best thing right now, and that may really be the future, or, a billionaire could buy that company too, and then just,
I think there's, right? Then move on to the next thing.
I think there's always going to be platforms that are like evolving and changing now. That's just kind of how media is. But I think that in some ways, you can be more nimble also as just an independent person. There's a lot of good stories that I heard of that I thought, well, sounds like it could be a good story, but it's not like a big enough of a scandal that it's worth putting on TV or on the front page of the newspaper. But it might be something that just a story that kind of needs to be told. Yeah. And I can, I can decide to do that now if I want to do that. And also, I learned something in each of these jobs, but I also got to the point where I'm like, okay, I know how to do this job. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm not, and the companies are sort of benefiting from my image and reputation as much as I'm benefiting from the legacy media organization. Obviously I still think that path is a great way, especially for a young journalist, to kind of build up a name and a reputation. And I think you're going to have some combination of that. And then you're seeing a lot of people now go independent. Let's see, Jim Acosta, Scott McFarlane, both of them have joined Substack. This hasn't really happened in Buffalo yet, but what you're seeing in a lot of other cities is some combination where like a legacy media employer will say, okay, you can do your independent thing, but also we want you to be affiliated with us in some way and give you a broader reach. And then, you also give us access to your followers. So, where like you used to go from like maybe one newspaper to another and the followers don't follow you. They subscribe to that outlet. Now, like you can kind of bring your own followers to the different places, deciding which one is. So I think it's just kind of the nature of the industry right now. I'm the kind of person that like, I like to jump around anyway. I typically I'll take 2 or 3 years in every job I've had. And then I'm like, okay.
Nightmare employee.
I'm like, all right, I'm bored now. Cause I'm really motivated by like growth.
Yeah.
And I want to be somewhere where like, when I like kind of master something, I do get kind of bored with it. And I'm like, okay, I want to be somewhere where I'm being challenged and pushed and having to grow. And, there's no motivator other than being out there. I don't have a boss anymore that's like on top of me, and that's great. But also, you don't really have a safety net either. So you're working for yourself. You're kind of like, and in a lot of ways, I'm having to learn some things that, like, I'm a journalist. I'm not a businessman, right? I don't know how a lot of this works.
Lawyer, not a businessman originally. A lot of parallels here. Trust me, I get it.
Yeah.
You learn on the fly. And I think though, but it's obviously you're extremely passionate about what you do. I mean, it's the passion that pushes you. And like talking about growth, like it's great to hear somebody talk about it like that, because it's like at our firm, like we push people really hard. Like we want people to grow. It's like we're pushing for excellence every day. And for the right type of person, they love it, but it's not for everybody. But speaking about passion, I mean, like, have you, like, I didn't even ask you this, like, why did you choose to become a journalist? Like, where did this all start?
So I actually wanted to be a sports writer. I played football growing up, and I wanted to be like, thought I want to write for Sports Illustrated someday. So I actually went to college thinking I would be some sort of sports journalist. Writing about football, basketball, whatever, rugby. And when I got hired, so I interned at the Buffalo News in college, really liked it. And when I got hired, they were like, we've got a position, but it's not in the sports desk, it's on the news desk. So I was like, take it or leave it. So I was like, okay, I'll take it. And then I'll just, as soon as I can, I'll move back to sports. But I never moved back to sports. And we started having kids, and the schedules were actually better. If you're a sports writer, you're working like every night and weekend.
Good point.
But no, I just enjoyed it and kind of just went from there. And then when I was at Buffalo News, I had a couple of really great mentors. Dan Herbeck is still there. Bob McCarthy, a lot of guys who were like, okay, Sue Shulman, Jim Heaney was there when I started, and they would like, Dan, I remember, would take me under his wing and be like, I was covering City Hall and Niagara Falls.
Oh man, Niagara Falls.
Yeah, it's just, which was actually the perfect, like, that was really like a great training ground for me to be an investigative reporter, because it taught me just like trust nobody. Everybody is some sort of a shyster with an angle, and like you cannot believe anything anyone says. You've got to verify it. And I don't know what it was about that place that I remember the mayor was like, I remember saying to him, like, the bar is low here. I mean, the previous mayor had been, I think, put in federal prison for some sort of corruption or something. And it was...
It's so sad. Like, my dad's from Niagara Falls, grew up in LaSalle, and, like, I still like going to, like, me and my wife go to La Hacienda and get pizza or Buzzies. And you drive through there, like, you're down Pine Avenue, you're like, dude, this place has so much potential, and you can see what it was. It sucks. I feel so
you're
bad
like,
for the people in
how
Niagara
do
Falls.
we... Like,
where
how did you
start?
mess this up?
And where would you even start to try to fix it?
Yeah, it's very, and you see the Canadian side as such a contrast.
Yeah.
Which some of that is like just built in because they have a better view of the falls and other things. And not that you necessarily want your downtown to be this kind of Ripley's Believe It or Not wax museum type thing, but you want to have something that people go to besides the falls, I know.
Unfortunately, I went to the aquarium the other day, and it was very depressing. We can do better.
You know what though? I still go. There's a bookstore. You ever been to the Book Corner?
No.
It's an indie bookstore in Niagara Falls.
Okay.
It's on Main Street. It's like the only business on Main Street. It's next to the police station, and it's this one guy who's owned the building for decades. It's 3 floors of
no kidding
of only used books.
Okay, cool.
Very cool place.
What's it called?
Book Corner.
Book Corner.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check it out. All right. So,
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
Sorry.
Of course.
So just, you're talking about your mentors, and what are the elements of a good story? Like, how do you know this is something I'm going to track and I can make bigger? And second, sorry, I'm going to do a follow-up. Who helped you, or how did you craft that art of storytelling? Because it's all facts, but then you have to tell a story too.
Right,
So
right. Those are great
work?
questions. Yeah. I think that, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than, and a lot of stories come back to kind of an elevator pitch thing. It's like, what are people talking about? What story is it when you look at the news lately that you say to your friend or someone that you meet at a party or whatever, hey, did you see this, or did you hear about that? I think about what I would tell my dad, when I saw him. Hey, you won't believe this thing that I heard. And those are, so whatever is people are talking about is, and are interested in. That's, I guess, one definition of news, right?
Yeah.
And like to answer the other question, my mentors always kind of like, Dan taught me that one of the things I learned a lot from Dan was that you can be a really like hard news, like investigative reporter without like being a jerk.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be like a mean person to like be this like tough reporter. You just have to be like firm and do your job. But also, sometimes you do catch more flies with honey.
Yeah.
And, as far as the process, I always look for documents. I'm a big documents guy. Okay, and this goes into the wrongful convictions thing, which is a whole nother thing I'm fascinated with.
Yeah.
What the REID technique is and everything,
Yeah.
right? So there's a way of, doing interviews in journalism also where you're trying to kind of get an answer. And then there's a way of explaining things, asking things for the main purpose of, I want to be able to go back and verify, check things that people say that are verifiable. So like, let's say they said it was a rainy day. Well, you can go back and check that on a certain date did it rain, and you just as a way that's something I do just to like for my own like vetting, just to see if a person is honest. Now, people make mistakes too also, right? But I have also been fascinated with the wrongful convictions because I have a certain amount of like privilege. I say I'm a white guy. I was always taught to like respect the police and law enforcement, and if you're in prison, then you must have done something wrong. Whereas, we've learned so much about the system and how unequal it is, and especially people who are not white, and that once that bell rings, it's hard to unring it.
Yep.
Once that thing gets locked behind you, I'm a huge John Grisham guy, so he's big into that. And some of the things that, you've seen on Netflix in recent years in that genre.
Oh yeah, it's terrifying.
I mean, I watched one, I forgot what it was, but it's like, why would a person like confess to murder that they didn't do? And it's like, it turns out there are many reasons that people sometimes will say things under duress that, that they think, oh, I can just have a lawyer that can fix this or whatever. And you look at some of those, I do think there's also a decent amount of like, those are the stories I'm more interested in, those kind of criminal justice stories. I mean, yes, you'll always have like some, officers doing something that gets caught on body camera and stuff, but the systemic things are, in a lot of ways, much more disturbing, because, these are positions where the state is giving someone power over this person's life.
Yeah.
And so being dishonest at any level of that is very, I remember just a couple of years ago before these, and I know this bail reform has been controversial, everything, but I know that I had attorneys who told me, as far as the discovery type stuff goes, they would be, the day that they were going to trial, the state would, that was the deadline for telling them what kind of evidence they were going to use at trial. So they're going through the trial and then trying to come up with a strategy. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's like, what? That's not fair at all. So, I mean, some of this stuff probably did need to be, changed.
Yeah, there's so much more on the line in criminal cases. I'm the first to admit that. Like, we only handle civil cases, and Yeah, I mean, look, you got a one shot at it, right? So it's no joke. Like someone's really seriously injured and they're going to be affected the rest of their life and you lose. That's like the worst feeling in the world, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't lose their liberty. Like they're not getting put in jail, or prison for the rest of their lives in some instances. So it's pretty tough. What do you think? You have me thinking now. What do you think is like the biggest story or something that like people are not talking enough about or not giving enough attention in Buffalo right now?
That's the thing. Like when you get into this field and you break open some big things, if anything, it teaches me. I've seen a lot of reporters get, they start breaking big stories and there's a tendency to think like, oh, well, I would know if something was happening because I hear everything. Whereas sometimes I think about like that Diocese story and I'm like, this was all happening right under all of our noses. This wasn't just in the 1960s. This is the 1990s and 2000s when I was a kid. This was all happening. Yeah. And they're saying it's not. And like, so what else is going on in this community? And it's kind of humbling because, I remember the more I'd learn about different systems, working, I would think there's probably something terrible going on right now in this community that I don't know about. And it would, I would try to it would give me some sort of humility, but yeah, there's probably things happening right now that, we don't know about. I do think on some levels that there probably is a decent amount that's happening with criminal justice that happens out of the public eye, just because, especially the prisons, the courts, New York. I'm thinking about actually doing a series this year. This is an idea that I came up with a coworker of mine about the state court system and its opaqueness. Did you know that we're the only state in the nation that doesn't allow cameras in the courtroom? I think it's us and DC, and they tried it for a trial period and they don't do it anymore. Yeah. But I was sitting watching the trial of Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis and thinking, I can watch this thing out of state every second. And yet we went into the courthouse to cover this Granville stuff. And man, I thought they were going to tackle me when I pulled out, like my phone to like record audio of something, so I could accurately depict it. And it's like, there's that. I think that the Erie County DA's office has never really been covered as a political entity, which a lot of other cities it is, because these are, and I don't mean just reporters eating out of the hand of whoever the DA is. And, I mean, covering, what kind of things are they charging? What are they not charging? Are they effective? There's very little, judges have huge power. There's very little little data to be able to evaluate that. And obviously there's also, the people that are appearing before a judge, they're not going to be the ones saying bad things about them. There's a self-interest there. But I think that, as Buffalo News has shrunk, other media outlets have shrunk, I think there's probably things happening in different parts of government that we don't even know about right now. And, those are the kind of things I want to look into.
That's awesome. You talked earlier in the conversation about a time when you were being stalked and you're living in hotels. Yet you keep doing what you're doing. You keep digging. What drives you? Because I mean, that must have been terrifying, to say the least. So what keeps you going? And do you ever find yourself like digging into a big story and even pausing and saying like, hey, I just need to like tell myself that like, even if I know I'm going forward, like let me just remind myself what I'm getting myself potentially into?
Yes.
Right. Respect, I mean, man. Like, yeah.
And maybe I was more just kind of gung ho when I was younger, a little younger. But, and you're hungry and you're ambitious and you're pushing and whatever I have to do, and I have had some level of harassment with the police stuff, intimidation, because I don't know, some people are just built that way, and they do take it personally, and they want to, dig into you because you're digging into them. But like, it's like, that makes no sense because I'm not a public official. I don't, anything like that. But when that happens, I've typically been able to go, to my bosses or to the authorities. I do know, a certain amount of police officers and chiefs and stuff, and good people that, have also stepped in and said, this is not right. You shouldn't be getting this kind of treatment. And, but yeah, it does make you pause. And it's not so much the big high profile things like that, because in some ways being more high profile, you're protected in some ways, because it's like, okay, it would be obvious if something happened. It's, you just don't know, like, our world is becoming really kind of, it's so divided. When I was started in journalism, it was always standard practice to, if you can't get someone on the phone, then you go knock on their door. You find out what their address is, and you go to their house and knock on their door. Nowadays, it's like, you think twice about that.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, okay, does this person have weapons?
Yeah.
How many people even come up and knock on your door? You're like stunned when someone rings your doorbell.
Oh, yeah,
like,
you're looking through the window
this?
like, who the hell came here unannounced?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so like, you just try to be safe.
Yeah.
As far as that goes. And I do try to just always contact people. As soon as I know I'm going to want to talk to them, I'll try to contact them right away and give them an opportunity to talk, and try not to surprise them. But, yeah, you do think about it, but, ultimately, if you just give in to that, then the bad guys win.
Yeah.
I can't allow that. I don't want to live in a society where, people can just, I don't want my kids to live in a society that is in any way sort of, undemocratic or, fascist or, something where the state has overwhelming power over the individual. I think that people, we are a divided country, but I do think that there's probably a bigger overlap than probably the media, the cable news media, lets us see.
Yeah.
Because that kind of media is just, they're incentivized to divide people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole point of it is to make money. It's not to do, a public service. I do think, it's harder, and this is another tactic too, is also why you'd go to someone's front doors, because I always try to get people on the phone rather than just email them, because it's harder to say no to someone or just to blow them off on the phone than it is on email. It's harder in person than it is on the phone, because there's a human exchange where, there's a human element to it.
Yeah.
And it probably makes you I'm probably less apt to do something inhumane too. Like you see someone, you're going to treat them at least like a person. Mm-hmm. I have had people run away from me, which is just, with this water thing, the one guy I was like, hey, I just want to interview real quick before this meet is a public meeting. The meeting ended. One of these board members gets up, and I can tell he's just already making his way for the door. And I'm like, come on. I'm like, I'm here. I'm here. I'm going to ask you. You probably know the questions I'm going to ask you. And I said, I don't want to chase you. And he said, well, you're not going to chase me. And then he runs out the door. And I'm like, darn it, we're gonna now you are making me do this, and we both basically look bad, because I look like this idiot reporter running and chasing someone out of a building, and you look like the guy that's afraid of that guy. So I try to avoid that if I can, but sometimes you just don't know, what people are going to do.
You mentioned earlier, you were talking about like the impact that breaking the diocese story had on you and your direct family, right? You're talking about your brother. I wanted to ask you, and maybe that's the answer, but like, is there a story that you've broke or one that you've worked on that has had like the biggest effect on your life personally?
Yeah, that was certainly a big one. And I met so many people through that story who, and I really have met so a couple of the bigger scandals that we've broken, the diocese, this big sheriff's thing. Early in my career, I did a story on Niagara County Community College. The president ended up getting fired because of it. And in all of those cases, it was like 2 or 3 just really good people who decided, I can't do this anymore. I can't put up with this. I have to say something. And they came forward, and I ended up getting, a lot of information from them, but also it does kind of restore your faith in humanity a little bit when you see that. And when you see that, we live in a society that's very complicated, very technologically sophisticated, where the individual person can seem so just, AI, we're going to be living in a complete computer world, soon. And I think that, stories like that, things kind of the behind the story, that's what keeps me kind of sane and gives me some measure of faith in humanity that things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because we've screwed things up so many times before that we've got to be able to fix them. There's got to be some way. I just saw that movie, Project Hail Mary.
I heard it's great.
It's really good. Yeah. And it's
in theaters right now, right?
Yeah. It's Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
And just with all the NASA stuff going on, I went and took my son to see it, and it's hard to appeal to everyone now, but it definitely got the message across that yes, our world is crazy divided, but aren't we all in this together kind of thing. They have, I don't want to spoil it, but they have a situation where they've got to go and find some scientific thing because the earth is going to end if they don't and nothing to unite everyone but it just was, it was really good. And I've kind of been reflecting on that and thinking about, every industry is being changed and transformed, but I do have some faith that we'll all figure it out, it just, when things seem like they can't get any crazier, we usually do kind of take a step back and be like, what are we doing here? You know?
Yeah.
But I've been fortunate enough to be in a situation where I've had a lot of good people that have stood up, and some of the feedback I've gotten, I thought that the diocese story, we would get a lot of blowback because it's a very Catholic area.
Yeah.
At the time, I lived in South Buffalo, which also is uber Catholic. And I thought, well, people are going to really blame us. They're going to, be upset. They're going to get some hate mail. And it was complete opposite. People were like, this stuff has got to stop. This is ridiculous. The lies, they keep lying to us. It's embarrassing for our faith, and just keep going. And that's Catholics telling me this. And I'm thinking, wow, okay. Yeah, I guess you can still make an impact. And, I've been really fortunate to, be in some of those positions. And, that's kind of what I want to. There's a lot of great young journalists coming up in Buffalo right now that I think are doing terrific things. Dale Shoemaker from Investigative Post, he's that guy is single-handedly covering all of this ICE stuff. He broke the huge story about the guy who was dropped off at a Tim Hortons, and then
did you see the report on that this morning? They ruled it a homicide.
Yeah, and he's doing great. Holly Kirkpatrick, she just went from BFO to Channel 7. my former coworker, Sean Mickey, just started his Substack. There's a lot of young talent in Buffalo still in the media, and I think I want to try to pass along some of, these lessons that I've learned to them, because that's the only way that our business, our industry survives is that kind of stuff. The people that I was fortunate that mentored me and showed me the ropes, you do that with the people who are younger than you coming up, in the hopes that, you're making your community better. Because ultimately, isn't that what we're all doing this for? It's not for fame and, certainly not fortune.
Yeah,
it's for, you're trying to make your community a better place. I'm a Buffalo guy, born in Buffalo, and, this community is a special place. It is. And, I just feel like this is the time where it's a crossroads in some ways with journalism too. And, I'm going to have to go out and make, the subscriptions are going well for me, but I'm going to have to go out and make kind of a pitch to people and say, okay, I'm looking for funders. This is what, I want our mission to be. This is what, the kind of journalism I'm going to be doing. And we think it's valuable. We think it's worth paying for, and just coming directly to people and trying to make that case. But, studies have shown that democracies, when there is no journalism in a quote unquote news desert, taxpayers end up paying more because corruption thrives in those environments. Yeah, there's no one looking.
Yeah.
Can't tell you how many stories I've done is well, why did this person do this? Because they could, because they got away with it, because they were embezzling and no one was watching, and, you end up paying for that. You definitely do. And I think that, it's always good to have accountability in whatever industry. And especially when it comes to, people are very busy now, whether you're raising kids or you're just trying to keep up with life. They don't have time to look into every little thing, but I do, and I can kind of see myself as an advocate on behalf of them.
I love it. Do you, I think this is one of the last questions I have for you, but now you have me thinking about it. Do you think true accountability only comes when there's legal or financial consequences?
You probably, and, but it is that even enough? I mean, you point. Look at you look at reputation. I'm surprised. I mean, as great as this community is, there have been many levels of corruption at various facets of government that have been unveiled, or uncovered over the years here. I'm surprised that we don't have some of the levers of accountability that they have. New York City has, I think they call it the Department of Investigation, where it's basically just a full-time anti-corruption kind of squad. Mm-hmm. In the federal level, they have them called inspector generals, although Trump has taken some steps to fire those people or do something with that. The attorney general for consumers fits that role in New York State. But in a lot of criminal matters, they don't have jurisdiction. I'm surprised, there isn't something like an inspector general type thing, at City Hall or in another, agency like that. Because I think that, fraud does happen, and it's something that you should always kind of have people looking into that, just as a deterrent almost to sort of bad behavior.
100%. Look, man, I'm excited for you to be out on your own. This is awesome. If people want to either help, talk to you about helping fund you, just to follow your Substack, to get in touch with you, or give you a tip, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, so if you just go to my link, it's Charlie Reports. So charliereports.substack.com, or if you just type in Charlie Specht Substack, it'll come up. And you can contact me via email right there. And also I'm on socials. I put all my stuff on, Instagram and X and Facebook and everything. So you can also find me there. But really appreciate everyone's support. And, if you see something, say something, send me a tip.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks for doing this. This is great. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. All right, everybody, that's a wrap on this episode of Angles. I appreciate you listening as always. And look, I just have one small favor to ask of you. If you got value out of this episode, please go on, whether you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever, like, subscribe, leave us a review, share this with your friends. Doing this makes the podcast more visible, ensures we can keep running this, we can keep getting great guests to tell these great stories. So again, if you've gotten any benefit out of this, share with a friend, your family member, whoever. We really appreciate it. Thanks as always for listening. We'll see you on the next one.